The skeletal remains of Vega Prime sprawled across the horizon like the bones of an ancient titan, picked clean by scavengers who had long since moved on to richer prey. Once, this world had pulsed with industrial might, the crown jewel of the Meridian Syndicate's manufacturing empire. They had forged weapons here, crafted cybernetic augmentations, and birthed technological marvels that would have made gods weep with envy. But empires built on greed have a way of devouring themselves. When the sector wars erupted, when corporate armies painted the void crimson with their endless hunger for dominance, Vega Prime became nothing more than collateral damage. Orbital bombardments had silenced its factories, trade embargoes had strangled its supply lines, and eventually, even the desperate had abandoned its corpse to the void. What remained was a necropolis of rust and ruin, inhabited only by those with nowhere else to go, mercenaries hunting easy marks, flesh traders peddling human misery, and the destitute souls too broken or too stubborn to seek salvation elsewhere. Through this wasteland walked Marcus Vale, his reinforced combat gear marking him as someone who belonged to the shadows. A plasma rifle hung across his broad shoulders, while a sidearm rested against his hip with the casual intimacy of an old friend. His movements carried the fluid confidence of a predator who had learned to read danger in the whisper of wind through broken glass. He moved without fear through these ruins, his weathered face a mask of controlled indifference beneath several days' worth of stubble. His gray eyes, sharp as broken steel, cataloged every shadow, every sound, every potential threat with the mechanical precision of a man who had survived too many wars to count. Marcus hadn't come to this dying world by choice, he never did. A contract had dragged him here, another thread in the web of necessity that kept him moving from one forgotten corner of the galaxy to another. Stolen energy cores from a black market freighter were supposedly hidden somewhere in this sector, and someone with deep pockets had paid him handsomely to retrieve them with no questions asked. Simple work. Clean work. The kind of job that should have been over before the local star had time to set. But Vega Prime had earned its reputation for drawing men into its gravity well of misery, and Marcus felt that familiar tug the moment he heard the voice, weak, ragged, desperate in the way that spoke of someone who had given up hope of rescue long ago. His first instinct was to ignore it, to keep walking and pretend he had heard nothing more than the wind through shattered playsteel. Marcus Vale wasn't a hero, had never claimed to be one. He did what was necessary, nothing more, nothing less. Yet something in that plea made him pause. It wasn't just the weakness in it was the resignation. The sound of someone calling out without any expectation of an answer, every damn time. He muttered under his breath, turning toward the source of the voice. The building he entered had once processed raw materials, if the twisted conveyor systems and shattered containment pods were any indication. The air hung thick with the stench of corroded metal and decay, while something skittered away into the darkness at the sound of his boots crushing debris underfoot. Then he saw it, a cage constructed from crude, rusted metal, its bars barely held together by corrosion and time, yet still strong enough to serve its cruel purpose. Inside, huddled in filth and despair, was a figure that made him pause. She was small and fragile, bound in restraints far too large for her delicate wrists. Her skin held an unusual olive hue marked by scars both fresh and ancient, while tangled copper hair spilled across her face like a veil of shame. Her clothing was little more than rags, torn and filthy, offering no protection against the bitter cold that pervaded this dead place. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They weren't human, large, almond-shaped, and glowing with an ethereal amber light that seemed to pierce straight through him. Those alien orbs stared at him with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "You're not one of them." Marcus tilted his head slightly. No. Silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then she pressed herself against the bars as if expecting violence. Marcus frowned. That reaction told him everything he needed to know about her captivity. This wasn't some unfortunate soul who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been here for a while, and whoever had put her in this cage had taught her to expect nothing but pain. "Easy," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her glowing eyes searched his face as if trying to detect deception in every line and shadow. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "People call me Lyra." "My name is Lyra." Marcus exhaled, his breath forming vapor in the cold air. "All right, Lyra. Who did this to you?" She hesitated, And when she finally spoke, the words were barely audible. Flesh traders. They said I wasn't worth selling. Something broken, something dark and violent stirred in Marcus's gut. Slavery wasn't uncommon in the outer systems, it was an ugly reality of life, beyond the reach of civilized law. But this, leaving someone to rot in a cage like garbage, represented a level of casual cruelty that even the worst scum usually avoided. He stepped forward. Lyra flinched. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his dark, unruly hair. I'm going to break those chains, understand? She stared at him, her breathing shallow and quick. You can't, she whispered. They're reinforced alloy. Marcus wrapped his hands around the metal restraints and pulled. The chains groaned in protest, and Lyra sucked in a sharp breath, expecting the same failure that had met every one of her desperate attempts to break free. Instead, there was a sharp crack as the metal snapped like brittle ceramic. Lyra gasped, blinking rapidly as the weight suddenly vanished from her wrists. Marcus rolled his shoulders dismissively. What kind of amateur uses cheap composite on prisoner restraints? She stared at him, her expression caught between disbelief and something that almost resembled fear. That's impossible, she whispered. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Not really. He didn't explain further. Lyra, despite her exhaustion, was still trying to process what had just happened. No one broke reinforced shackles with their bare hands. No one. Unless the stories were true, real, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Marcus frowned. What? She swallowed hard. Humans. I thought you were just stories. Something the elders whispered about in dark corners. Marcus sighed. Well, surprise. We exist. She shuddered, overwhelmed by something he couldn't identify. Marcus crouched beside her, his eyes scanning her frail form. Can you walk? Lyra tried to stand but barely made it to her knees before her strength failed her. She pitched forward, and would have struck the ground if Marcus hadn't caught her in one smooth motion. She gasped as he lifted her, her weight nearly negligible in his arms. For a moment, Lyra didn't move, didn't breathe. No one had ever carried her like this, not with care, not without malice lurking beneath the surface. She looked up at him, her amber eyes flickering with something unreadable. Where are you taking me? Somewhere that isn't here, he said simply, and, for the first time in her life, Lyra felt something she had never dared to hope for: safety. Because a human had found her, and everything was about to change, Lyra awakened to warmth, a sensation so foreign that for several heartbeats she was convinced she was dreaming. The heat wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, easing the perpetual ache that had lived in her bones for as long as she could remember. For the first time in cycles beyond counting, she felt neither cold nor the crushing weight of despair pressing in from all sides. She blinked, adjusting to the soft lighting. The cage was gone. The cruel metal bars had been replaced by an actual bed, stiff and utilitarian, perhaps, but real nonetheless, with coarse but clean linens that smelled of soap rather than decay. A gentle hum vibrated through the floor beneath her, rhythmic and steady. A starship. Her breath caught as realization dawned. She tried to sit up, but her muscles rebelled, weakness clinging to her like chains forged from exhaustion itself. Easy there, a familiar voice said. Lyra flinched, her gaze snapping toward the source. Marcus Vale leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. He had shed his tactical jacket, leaving only a dark-fitted shirt that revealed the lean strength in his shoulders and arms. A blaster sat holstered at his hip, close enough to draw in an instant, but relaxed enough to suggest he wasn't expecting immediate trouble. You're safe, he added, noting her tension. Lyra's mind screamed warnings at her not to trust him, yet here she was alive, warm, and unshackled. That had to mean something. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Where? My ship, Marcus said simply. The night's edge glided through the obsidian void, a shadow against the endless sea of distant suns. Marcus sat at the controls, scanning the readouts with an attention that hadn't left his body since the bounty had gone public. He knew what was coming. Trouble always found him, like a hungry predator following the scent of blood. Lyra sat across from him, her amber eyes locked on the viewport. The ship's dim lighting cast soft shadows across her features. She wasn't the same girl he had pulled from that cage. She sat straighter now, her hands steady, her gaze sharper. You're thinking too hard again, she said. Marcus smirked. You keep saying that like it's a character flaw. Lyra arched a brow. It is. People who think too much usually end up regretting something. Yeah? What do people who don't think end up doing? She smirked back. Usually dying. Marcus chuckled. Good thing I fall somewhere in the middle. The ship's proximity alarm blared. Lyra's smirk vanished as she turned to the console, her fingers curling against the seat. What is it? Marcus's jaw tightened. Company. He tapped several buttons. The scanner pulsed, displaying the unmistakable silhouette of a warship emerging from hyperspace. Lyra inhaled sharply. That's not bounty hunters, no, Marcus muttered. It was something far worse. The vessel bore the insignia of the Crimson Syndicate, a private warship belonging to one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the galaxy. The same people who had systematically exterminated the Kellen and declared Lyra's entire species an evolutionary mistake. Marcus cursed under his breath. I was hoping we'd have more time. Lyra's fingers dug into the seat. They found me. We're always going to, Marcus said. I just didn't think they'd send a whole damn warship to collect you. Lyra swallowed hard. What do they want with me? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He studied the ship's markings, the gleaming emblem on its side depicting a crimson star consuming a golden world. You're more than just a runaway slave, he said finally. And I think you know that. Lyra hesitated, something flickering behind her expression. A transmission came through. A calm, elegant voice filled the cockpit. Marcus Vale, you are harboring stolen property. Stand down and prepare for boarding, or we will tear your ship apart. Lyra stiffened. Marcus rolled his shoulders. You'd think criminals could at least pretend to have manners. Lyra's breathing turned shallow. They'll take me back. Marcus reached over, gripping her wrist firmly. No, they won't. Her breath hitched. You're not property, he said, his voice steady and firm. And I don't hand over people, ever. The warship's turrets powered up, glowing like a storm waiting to break. Lyra tore her gaze away from the viewport. We can't win against that, Marcus smirked. Good thing I don't plan on fighting fair. He slammed the throttle, sending the Knight's Edge into a sharp dive. The ship's engines screamed in protest as they cut dangerously close to the warship's underbelly. The enemy fired. Blue energy streaked past their hull, missing by mere meters. Lyra clutched the seat, her pulse racing. This is your plan? More. Like enthusiastic improvisation, Marcus replied, jerking the controls and spinning the ship into a tight roll as another blast barely grazed them. The Knight's Edge was fast, but not invincible. They're locking onto us, Lyra warned. Not for long, Marcus grinned. He flicked a switch. The ship's countermeasures activated, deploying a cluster of electromagnetic mines directly into the warship's path. A beat of silence. Then impact. The mines detonated in a flash of blinding blue light, disrupting the warship's tracking systems. The scanners flickered wildly as the massive vessel struggled to adjust. Lyra's eyes widened. You just blinded them. Temporarily, Marcus muttered. We need a real exit strategy. Lyra's mind raced. The warship wouldn't stay disoriented for long. They needed more than a head start. She turned to Marcus, something fierce in her expression. Take us into the asteroid field. Marcus blinked. What kind of idea is that? They won't follow, because it's a death trap. Lyra's jaw tightened. Not for me. Marcus studied her. Lyra wasn't asking, she was deciding. Something had shifted between them. Marcus exhaled. All right, hope you're right. He yanked the controls. The Knight's Edge veered hard, diving toward the jagged belt of asteroids. Ahead, chunks of frozen rock and debris spun wildly, colliding with each other like angry gods waging war. The warship hesitated. Lyra watched, her fingers gripping the console. They're not moving. Marcus arched a brow. Told you they're not stupid enough to follow us here. Lyra let out a shaky breath. Then we're safe, for now, Marcus muttered. The warship loomed in the distance, unable to pursue. The asteroid field was too unpredictable, its gravity wells and shifting debris forming a natural fortress. Marcus leaned back, letting out a low chuckle. Well, that was exhilarating. Lyra didn't laugh. She stared at the warship, her golden eyes burning with something new. They'll never stop, she whispered. Marcus watched her carefully. Then we don't stop either. Lyra turned to him. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. For the first time, she was angry. Marcus smirked. You've got that look. Lyra raised a brow. What look? The one people get when they stop running. Lyra inhaled slowly. Then softly. I want to fight back. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. Thought you might say that. A long silence stretched between them. Then Lyra did something she never would have done before. She reached out. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of something deeper. Marcus felt the brush of her fingertips against his hand. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a problem the galaxy would never see coming. The Night's Edge floated at the edge of the asteroid field, battered but defiant. The warship behind them remained at a safe distance, a looming reminder that this conflict was far from over. Lyra stared at it from the viewport, her amber eyes steady. A week ago, she would have trembled at the thought of facing them. A week ago, she would have been running, waiting for the inevitable. Now she wasn't afraid. She turned to Marcus, who was seated at the controls, fingers drumming lazily against the console. His wound was still healing, but he acted as if it was nothing. He always did. You really don't feel pain like normal people, do you? She asked. Marcus smirked. Pain's a great motivator. Lyra rolled her eyes, but smiled. His smirk faded slightly. As he glanced at the scanner, they're waiting. For what? For us to slip up. For backup. For orders from whoever sent them. Lyra exhaled. They won't stop, will they? Marcus shook his head. Not until you're dead or back in a cage. Her fingers clenched into fists. She had spent her entire life being someone's property, waiting for the next master, the next set of chains. She had been powerless a pawn in someone else's war. Not anymore. We need to fight back, she said. Marcus studied her for a long moment. That's not just anger talking, is it? Lyra met his gaze, her jaw tight. No. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. All right then. You want to start a war? I want to finish one. Marcus chuckled. Damn, I was hoping you'd say that. He stood, rolling his shoulders. First step, we find out why they want you so badly. If they're willing to throw a warship after us, you're more than just an escaped slave. Lyra frowned. I've told you everything. I know. Marcus shook his head. Not everything. Not yet. Lyra hesitated. There were gaps in her memory. She had always assumed it was trauma, the result of too much pain and too many years spent locked away. But what if it was something else? All right, she said. Where do we start? Marcus grinned. With someone who hates these bastards as much as we do. They landed on Kepler Station, a hidden outpost deep in neutral space. It wasn't much, just a collection of interconnected modules clinging to the surface of a barren asteroid. But it had something more important than comfort, a contact. The man waiting for them in the underground cantina was old, scarred by war, with cybernetic arms that looked like they had seen 1,000 battles. His name was Tobias Kane, and he had been fighting the Syndicate longer than most people had been alive. Marcus Vale, he grumbled as they approached his corner booth. You really know how to anger the right people, Marcus smirked. Keeps life interesting. Kane turned his one organic eye toward Lyra, his expression shifting. He didn't see a runaway slave. He saw something more. You're one of them, he murmured. Lyra stiffened. One of what? Kane exhaled heavily. The Kellen weren't just hunted, they were erased. Someone out there decided they were a threat to the balance of power. Lyra swallowed. Why? Kane's cybernetic fingers tapped against the table. Because your people weren't just different, they were evolutionary perfection. They could see patterns where others couldn't, had instincts that couldn't be trained, abilities that couldn't be controlled. And someone decided that was too dangerous. Lyra felt the words settle into her bones, the weight of them making it hard to breathe. Why keep me alive? She asked. Kane sighed. Maybe you were meant to be studied. Maybe they were waiting for you to mature into whatever power they feared. His gaze darkened. Or maybe you were meant to die quietly, forgotten like the rest. Marcus's jaw tightened. Well, that plan's shot to hell now. Kane nodded. Yeah, and now they'll come at you harder. Lyra met Marcus's gaze. Then we hit first. Marcus grinned. Damn right. The Night's Edge was fully repaired, stocked with supplies, and armed for war. The bounty still loomed over them, but something fundamental had changed. Lyra wasn't just running anymore, she was choosing to fight. As Marcus ran final checks, Lyra stood beside him, watching the stars outside the viewport. Do you regret it? She asked. He glanced at her. Regret what? Saving me. Marcus huffed. You kidding? This is the most fun I've had in years. Lyra laughed, a real, unguarded sound. She turned to face him fully. I never got to choose anything before. You're choosing now. She nodded. And I choose this. I choose to fight. Marcus's smirk softened into something else, something real. Then let's make some trouble. he said. Lyra held out her hand not as a plea, not as a question, but as a promise. Marcus didn't hesitate. He took her hand, gripping it firmly. The warship still hunted them. The galaxy was still broken, but for the first time, Lyra wasn't afraid of what came next. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living, and with a human by her side, she was ready for whatever the universe threw at them. The end. For now, Edge, nothing fancy, but she's reliable. Lyra forced her lips to move. You took me. You weren't exactly in a position to walk out under your own power. She clenched her fingers into the blanket. Why? Marcus's expression didn't shift. Figured leaving you there was a pretty terrible thing to do. She blinked. That was it? No elaborate explanation. No hidden agenda? Just because? That didn't make sense. You didn't have to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Marcus agreed, but Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, I didn't plan on adopting a stray, but I don't make it a habit of walking past dying people and pretending I didn't see them. You think that's strange? Fine, but that's how humans operate. Lyra had no response to that. She had spent her entire existence surrounded by cruelty, by those who viewed kindness as weakness and took pleasure in others' suffering. No one had ever helped her without expecting something in return. No one until now. She studied him, searching for the deception, for the moment when he would drop the act and reveal his true intentions. All she found was exhaustion, the kind that settled into a person's bones after too many battles and too little rest. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Lyra hesitated. I don't know. That was the truth. Her body still ached, but it was a different kind of pain, a healing one rather than a dying one. The hunger that had gnawed at her insides was dulled, manageable, and there was warmth. She hadn't felt real warmth in so long. Figured you'd need food, Marcus said, jerking his thumb toward a small table beside the bed. A steaming bowl sat there, the aroma making her stomach contract painfully. Didn't know what your species eats, so I improvised. Made soup. Hard to go wrong with soup? She stared at him. He had cooked for her. He must have read her expression because he sighed. It's not poisoned. It's not a trap. You eat because you're hungry. That's all there is to it. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for the bowl. The moment the warm liquid touched her tongue, she nearly wept. It was bland, oversalted, and the vegetables were overcooked, but it was real food, not scraps, not leftovers, but an actual meal. She ate quickly, her body demanding more sustenance than she could safely give it. Slow down, Marcus said, watching her with something close to amusement. You'll make yourself sick. Lyra forced herself to take smaller portions, but her hands continued to shake. Marcus leaned against the doorway again, arms crossed. So what's your story? He asked. She paused mid-bite. He was asking about her, not demanding information, not interrogating her, just asking. She swallowed carefully. You already know I was a slave, Marcus nodded. What else? My people, she continued slowly, the Kellen, were gone, hunted to extinction. His jaw tightened. By who? She let out a bitter laugh. No one knows. Or if they do, they don't care. We were labeled a genetic aberration. Marcus frowned. Dangerous how? Lyra hesitated. We were different. We could sense things others couldn't. Feel patterns in chaos. Some called it instinct. Others called it unnatural. Marcus processed. This? Some kind of psychic ability. Lyra shrugged. I never had the chance to understand it properly. Before I could even learn what I was, they took me. Marcus leaned back against the wall, his expression unreadable. How long? Since I was a child. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. How? That was all he said. No false sympathy, no empty platitudes. Just acknowledgement of the brutal reality she had endured. Lyra didn't know why, but that single word made her feel lighter somehow. She licked her lips, the taste of the soup still lingering. You're not what I expected, Marcus snorted. Yeah, I get that a lot. She tilted her head. You're human. Why aren't there more of you? Marcus's expression darkened slightly. We're not exactly the galaxy's favorite species. We don't fit neatly into the civilized categories everyone else built. Too unpredictable, too stubborn, too human. Lyra considered that. It made sense. She had heard whispers of humans, wild, untamed creatures who refused to break under pressure. She believed it now. Marcus pushed off from the wall. Get some rest. You need it. Lyra hesitated. You're not locking me in. Something flickered across his face. You're free, Lyra. What you do with that freedom is up to you. He turned toward the door. Before he could leave, Lyra spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Marcus paused, then gave a small nod before the door slid shut. Behind him, Lyra curled beneath the blanket, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced. For the first time in her life, she had a choice and it terrified her. The warning hit Marcus's console like a physical blow, a crimson bounty notice flashing across the screen with bold, undeniable text. Bounty issued, Marcus Vale. 5 million. Credits. Dead or alive, he swore under his breath, rubbing the tension from his temples. This was worse than he had anticipated. A bounty of this magnitude wasn't just punishment, it was a declaration. The flesh traders wanted everyone in the sector to know that stealing from them wasn't merely a crime. It was suicide. Marcus dismissed the alert, leaning back in his pilot's chair with a weary sigh. Vega Prime had been risky, but he hadn't expected this level of retaliation. He had angered dangerous people before, but 5 million credits? That wasn't standard revenge money. Someone out there wanted him dead with a passion that bordered on obsession. He barely had time to process the implications before he heard soft footsteps behind him. Lyra stood in the cockpit doorway, her copper hair still damp from the shower. Wearing one of his oversized shirts, the bruises on her arms had faded somewhat, but her amber eyes held a flicker of concern. You're frowning again, she said quietly. Marcus let out a tired chuckle. You keep saying that like it's some kind of crime. Lyra stepped closer. It's different this time. Marcus didn't respond. She was too perceptive even after everything she had endured, after a lifetime of being treated as less than nothing. She could still read people with uncanny accuracy. That was dangerous, but also potentially useful. Instead of answering, he spun his chair to face her. Someone put a bounty on me. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Because of me? No. His voice was firm. Because of them. They don't like losing property. That's all this is. She shook her head, struggling to meet his gaze. They'll come for you now. They're welcome to try, Marcus muttered. Lyra stared at him, her golden eyes filled with something he couldn't quite identify. You're not afraid, she whispered. Fear doesn't help, but it keeps you alive. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Listen, I've been in worse situations. I get out of them the same way every time, by not panicking. If I stop to be scared, I'm already dead. Lyra chewed on her lower lip, processing his words. Then quieter she said, humans don't make sense. Marcus smirked. We get that a lot. Lyra hesitated, as if debating whether to say something else, but before she could speak, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Marcus's attention snapped to the console, his stomach sinking. Company, he announced. What kind? Lyra asked. Instantly alert, he tapped several keys, pulling up the long-range scanner display. 3 vessels appeared on screen, approaching fast. Lyra's breath caught. Slavers? Maybe. Or bounty hunters. Marcus's jaw tightened as he studied the readouts. Doesn't matter. The Night's Edge sensors pulsed, analyzing the incoming ships. Not random pirates looking for easy prey, these were professionals. Gunships with military-grade shielding and weapons systems. Lyra took a step back, her entire body going rigid. They found us that quickly? Marcus's mind raced. Someone must have leaked their trajectory. A bounty this fresh shouldn't have drawn hunters so rapidly. Unless someone had been waiting for an excuse to kill him. Marcus killed the ship's identification beacon, cutting off their location feed. It wouldn't stop the hunters, but it might slow them down. A warning shot streaked past the viewport, a plasma blast that came uncomfortably close. Marcus gritted his teeth. They weren't interested in conversation. Hold on, he muttered, slamming the throttle forward. The Night's Edge dove hard, engines screaming as the ship veered off its original course. Plasma rounds cut through the darkness, barely missing there. Halt! Lyra gripped the back of his chair. Are you insane? Completely. Marcus shot back. The enemy vessels pursued them, their thrusters glowing like angry stars in the void. Lyra's fingers tightened on the chair as another barrage of plasma fire rained down around them. The ship rocked violently under the assault. Marcus swore under his breath. Shields won't hold forever. Then do something, Lyra said through gritted teeth. Marcus's hands flew over the controls. He adjusted the stabilizers, cut the thrusters for half a second, just long enough to let momentum pull them into an unexpected dive. The enemy ships weren't prepared for the maneuver. One of them overcompensated, veering too hard to correct its course and spinning out of control. One down, Marcus muttered as the disabled ship tumbled away into the void. The remaining two vessels weren't deterred. They maintained their pursuit with relentless determination. Lyra's breathing grew shallow. "They're still on us," I noticed. A plasma round grazed their hull, sending warning lights flashing across the console. Marcus yanked the controls, sending the Knight's Edge into a sudden, brutal flip. Lyra nearly flew from her position as the ship inverted. The enemy vessels shot past them, suddenly finding themselves being hunted rather than hunting. Marcus fired. Twin plasma cannons roared to life, and one of the pursuing ships exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. The final ship panicked. Marcus could tell by the way it began jerking erratically, desperate to escape. Too late. Another precise shot, and the last hunter became wreckage drifting in the cosmic wind. Silence fell over the cockpit. The Knight's Edge drifted, smoke curling from overtaxed engines but still intact. Lyra stared at the destruction outside the viewport. "You just destroyed 3 ships. Yep, by yourself. Technically, you were here yelling at me, so that counts as teamwork." Lyra let out a breathless laugh, a real one, unguarded and genuine. Marcus turned to study her. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. He watched her for a moment longer before leaning back in his seat. "Welcome to life with me, kid. It's never boring." Lyra's gaze drifted back to the debris field outside the viewport. For the first time in her life, she wasn't helpless. And she had a human to thank for that realization. The ship continued to vibrate from the recent battle, the acrid scent of overheated circuits and scorched metal lingering in the recycled air. Marcus exhaled sharply, his fingers drumming against the console in a restless rhythm. The Knight's Edge had survived the encounter, but she was wounded much like him. Lyra sat across from him in the cramped cockpit, her eyes fixed on the viewport, where the wreckage of the bounty hunter's ship still floated like broken monuments to violence. Her expression was unreadable, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled into the fabric of her borrowed shirt. "You all right?" he asked. She blinked as if pulled from deep contemplation. "I don't know," she admitted. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You're free now." The word felt foreign on her tongue. Free. For as long as she could remember, she had belonged to someone else, chained, caged, existing only at the whim of voices she had never dared to disobey. And now she sat on a smuggler's ship, alive because a human had decided she was worth saving. The universe didn't work that way. She looked at him, studying the casual way he moved, so unbothered, as if nearly dying in the void was just another ordinary day. "You risked your life," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Marcus shrugged. "It's what I do." Lyra tilted her head. "Why?" "Because someone had to." She frowned. "That's not an answer." Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling slowly. "Fine. You want the truth? I don't have a noble reason. I saw you in that cage, and it made me angry. I don't like seeing people in chains. That's all there is to it." Lyra studied him intently, searching for deception. There was none. "You're an idiot," she muttered. Marcus smirked. "Most people agree with that assessment." A warning alarm blared, pulling his attention back to the screen. The ship's scanners were detecting movement in the distance. Lyra straightened. "What now?" Marcus's fingers flew over the controls. "We've got company." "More bounty hunters?" Marcus shook his head, his expression darkening. "No, worse." The console screen displayed a new reading, not the small fighters they had faced before, but something much larger. A cruiser. Lyra's stomach twisted into knots. "Slavers?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Yeah." The ship lurched violently as a gravitational tether latched onto their hull, yanking them into forced docking. The Knight's Edge engines whined in protest, but escape was no longer an option. "They're boarding us," Marcus muttered. Lyra's hands clenched into fists. She had spent years being dragged from one prison to another, but she refused to go back without a fight. A low growl escaped her throat. Marcus glanced at her, surprised, then grinned. "That's the spirit." The ship shuddered as docking clamps engaged with a loud metallic clang that reverberated through the hull. Marcus stood, rolling his shoulders. "You ever shoot a weapon before?" Lyra hesitated. "No, figures." He tossed her a compact energy pistol. "Point and pull the trigger. Don't miss." Lyra caught it, surprised by the weight in her hands. "Stay behind cover," Marcus said, pulling his shotgun from its mounting. The weapon hummed as it powered up, blue light pulsing along its barrel. "And if you see an opening, take it," Lyra swallowed. Hard nodding, the ship's airlock hissed open. A storm of boots and gunfire crashed into the main compartment. The first slaver through the entrance barely had time to register Marcus's presence before the shotgun roared, the blast sending him flying backward into his companions. Lyra dove behind the control console, her heart pounding like a war drum. Marcus moved like a predator, using the confined space to his advantage. He fired, ducked, reloaded with practiced efficiency that spoke of countless similar encounters. Lyra's grip on the pistol tightened. She wasn't useless. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, she leaned out of cover and fired. The shot went wide, slamming into a bulkhead instead of its intended target. A slaver spotted her. He grinned cruelly, raising his rifle with deliberate slowness. Lyra's blood ran cold. Before he could fire, Marcus was on him. He closed the distance in an instant, grabbing the slaver's weapon and twisting. The rifle clattered to the deck as Marcus's fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him crashing against the wall. Lyra stared, breathing heavily. "Aim better next time," Marcus muttered, stepping over the unconscious form. Lyra gritted her teeth. "I don't miss twice." She ducked as another slaver took a shot at her. This time, when she returned fire, she didn't hesitate. The energy blast struck its target, sending the attacker staggering backward. Something inside Lyra shifted. She wasn't a victim anymore. She refused to be. The last remaining slaver tried to retreat, backing toward the airlock. Marcus cracked his knuckles. Not happening. He grabbed a fallen plasma grenade from one of the bodies, primed it, and tossed it toward the fleeing enemy. The slaver's eyes widened. Wait, the grenade detonated, sending a shockwave through the docking bridge. The remaining attacker was thrown backward, disappearing in a cloud of smoke and debris. Silence followed. Lyra stared at the carnage, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Marcus leaned against the console, shotgun resting casually on his shoulder. "Well, that was entertaining," he said. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You're insane," Marcus grinned. "You're welcome." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked past him, standing over one of the fallen slavers. Her fingers curled into fists. They had hunted her, owned her, treated her like property to be bought and sold. And now they were nothing. Marcus watched her carefully, noting the rage in her eyes, the fire that hadn't been there before. "You all right?" he asked. Lyra exhaled, forcing herself to breathe steadily. "I will be." She looked at him, something fierce and determined flickering behind her amber eyes. "Yeah," she said with newfound conviction. "I will be." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. Now let's get the hell out of here before more of them show up." Lyra followed him back to the cockpit, her hands steady now. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting back. The night's edge drifted through the vast emptiness of space, far from the wreckage of the slaver vessel. The adrenaline from the fight had faded, leaving behind only exhaustion and the kind of silence that settled over survivors after violence had claimed its due. The dim cockpit lights cast long shadows over the controls, flickering as if sharing in the ship's fatigue. Marcus sat slumped in the pilot's chair, pressing a torn piece of cloth against his left side where a fresh wound bled through his shirt. The slaver's parting shot had grazed him, leaving a deep, burning gash just above his ribs. It wasn't fatal, but it hurt like hell. Across from him, Lyra watched with narrowed eyes. Her grip on the energy pistol had loosened, but tension still lingered in her shoulders. She wasn't shaking anymore. That was progress. "You're hurt," she observed. "Not the worst I've had." Marcus winced, peeling the blood-soaked fabric from his skin. "I'll live." Lyra stood abruptly. Without a word, she disappeared down the corridor, her bare feet silent against the cold metal deck plating. Marcus let out a slow breath, rolling his head against the chair back. He was so damn tired. A minute later, she returned with a medical kit clutched in her hands. Marcus blinked. "Didn't take you for a medic." Lyra didn't respond. She knelt beside him, popping open the case and rummaging through the supplies with quick, practiced movements. Her actions were precise, almost too familiar. "Where do you learn first aid?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then muttered, "Slaves are taught to mend their owners before themselves." Marcus's stomach twisted with disgust at the implication. Lyra ignored his silence, pulling out a small vial of antiseptic. "This will burn," she warned, Before he could brace himself, she poured the solution directly onto the wound. Marcus hissed a sharp curse, his muscles locking from the sudden pain. Lyra didn't flinch. I told you it would burn. Marcus let out a strained breath. Remind me not to make you angry. She gave him a look. I don't think you know how to avoid that. Marcus chuckled despite the pain, the sound rough but genuine. She was getting comfortable with him, that was encouraging. Lyra worked in silence, pressing gauze firmly over the wound before wrapping a bandage around his torso. Her hands, though delicate, carried an undeniable strength forged through hardship and necessity. Marcus watched her, studying the furrow of concentration in her brow, the way her lips pressed together in quiet focus. She had survived hell and was still standing. That took a special kind of strength. When she finished, she sat back on her heels. It'll hold. Marcus flexed experimentally, testing the bandage. Not bad, kid. Lyra's gaze flicked up to meet his. I'm not a kid. Something in her voice made him pause. There was no anger, no sharpness, just quiet insistence. Marcus nodded. Fair enough. Lyra exhaled, tucking the supplies back into the medical kit. Her hands lingered over the case before she spoke again. Are you always like this? Marcus frowned. Like what? Risking yourself for others, he scoffed. You think I do this all the time? Lyra tilted her head. You fight like someone who doesn't expect to live very long. Marcus went still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Damn, you don't hold back, do you? Lyra studied him, her golden eyes bright against the dim cockpit lighting. You saved me. You didn't have to. So why? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhausting. Slowly. I don't know. Maybe I'm just sick of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. Lyra frowned. You don't know if I'm good. I don't know if I am either, Marcus admitted. Lyra looked away. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt different, less tense, more uncertain. I thought humans were myths, she said quietly. Marcus arched a brow. Myths? She nodded. The stories I heard made humans sound like ghosts. Monsters that didn't break, that didn't die like the rest of us. Marcus smirked. Well, the not dying part is still a work in progress. Lyra let out something close to a chuckle. You're different from what I expected. Marcus leaned back in his chair. What did you expect? Lyra hesitated, then admitted. Someone cruel. Marcus's smirk faded. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You're free now. No one's coming to take you back. Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she looked out the viewport, staring at the distant stars. Do you ever wonder what comes next? She asked. Marcus sighed. All the damn time. Lyra turned to him. What do you want, Marcus? He blinked. No one had ever asked him that question before. The answer should have been easy: credits, freedom, a ship that didn't fall apart every other job. But for the first time, none of those things felt right. I don't know, he admitted. Lyra's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected that answer. Then she nodded. Me neither. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. The way starlight reflected in her eyes, the way she sat closer now than she had before. Something was shifting between them. Lyra broke the silence first. Where do we go now? Marcus's gaze lingered on her before he smirked. Anywhere we damn well please. Lyra breathed in, then out. For the first time, the future didn't seem so terrifying. And for the first time, she wasn't alone.